About 2 months ago, I got ratioed on Twitter since I broke the unwritten yet ubiquitously known rule of having an opinion. Now you might be thinking, that's not a ratio, that's not even 10 retweets. I have 0 followers. I have 0 followers. I mostly use it for saying things that I'll be able to look back on to see how I've changed in the future, or to see if I'm a prophet or a dumb fuck, so I don't really care about any engagement right now. Of course, a part of what I say has to be throwing out anything that goes against the common flow at the time just to see if I'm right, and although I haven't done much of that, the first time I believe that I've ever done that, it got any response somehow. My assumption is through some keyword searches and the Twitter algorithm that literally anybody saw it. I mean, it must be, but I would never have guessed this half-baked take would have been sucked in for some reason. So let's look at what I said first, because what I said isn't exactly what I'm arguing in this video, and even then I would like to clear it up. There are 2 implications in this tweet. One that should have been implied, and one that should have been made more explicit, but didn't because I didn't think anyone would see it. Let me read it explicitly. This might be going out on a limb, but I think the NieR Automata anime, if done well, will work better for me than the game, assuming it's adapting the game and not creating a separate storyline. The "for me" part should have been implied. It's my opinion, it's subjective, but it's Twitter, you need to clarify everything. The other part, if done well, isn't really given because it seems like most of the discussion around the adaptation is around whether or not it can even be good, without it being some insurmountable mountain to climb, but that's what this is about. It can be good, and it wouldn't be as difficult as people are saying.
I don't imagine that this is going to end well.
Before I even get into any of how this could work though, I have another wrong opinion to give. I thought the game was a 7 out of 10. That's definitely not a bad score, at least not in my book, but it appears the majority of people who've played the game love it or like it more than I did, and I think I need to explain why to support the idea that the anime could fix what I believe the game lacked, or more rather didn't fully capitalize on. The meat and bones of NieR is the story, and not so much the gameplay, because the gameplay for the most part is boring. It's very spammy, and the variety in enemies isn't enough to bring a new challenge. Many attacks have a red light combined with a robotic buzz to indicate an attack, and you usually react to that attack in a similar amount of time, so it doesn't feel like you have to actually learn any of the moves or animations from any of the enemies. It could also be the absurd amount of invincibility that the dodge roll gives, but I don't have my own footage to test it out, so you'll either have to take my word or disagree. That was probably my main issue with it, and although that's not as true with the bosses, it was such a large portion of the game that it deviated me away from many of the side quests. I didn't have it in me to sit through something that felt too repetitive or something that's optional, which is kind of a shame. The footage I'm using is from YouTuber streamer Joseph Anderson, and I listened to the VODs on his second channel, where he went through many more of the side quests than I did, and it seemed like they were actually interesting in terms of writing, but it's only kind of a shame because I also saw all the combat he had to go through to get to it and thought, I'm still unsure if it would have been worth it. This is where the anime could come in and elevate the source material a little bit. Despite the combat lacking in a mechanical sense, it does look really flashy, and the anime can make it look even cooler. There are entire anime that I watch purely for the fight spectacle, but that combined with a thought-provoking story tends to make for some of the greats. Since it's being animated by A1, there's a 50-50 chance that it goes either way. They have a track record of being a bit inconsistent, but 86 makes me hopeful that they're able to recreate the dystopian feel of the game. So instead of having some gameplay that doesn't feel like it adds much to the story, transitioning it into animation could bring about a new visually interesting experience. It's here that I'll mention if you did like the gameplay, that's fine, and if for whatever reason it added to the game for you, that's great. But that also means it's likely you won't enjoy the anime as much. If executed to its best potential in either medium, game, and anime, NieR would most likely work better as a game, but I still had a lot left to be desired when I finished it, so an anime could 100% pluck away some of the faults I had with the game. However, if you didn't have the same desire, then I'm not sure what an anime could add unless it expands upon the world already built or has some Demon Slayer type animation. That might be a bit presumptuous, but going off of my thoughts and other people's reactions, it's the first conclusion that came to my mind. Even with all this said, this all goes off the assumption that the anime could even work. All this has been discussing whether or not why I might like it better though, and not addressing any of the possible concerns that people seem to have with this adaptation. There are 2 main ones, which is funny because I think neither of them are the biggest issue. The first one that people bring up is the endings. There are 26 endings. How will they adapt all that? Well, I'm assuming they won't. Of these 26 endings, 20 of them are joke/bad endings. A few of them are running away from an important event, one of them is removing the OS chip that powers you, another is eating a mackerel that fries your circuits. If you run away from one of the big events, the dialogue literally reads, "Fed up, 2B left the camp to its fate and decided to go Fishing? Yeah, that's it. Fishing. With a smile on her face, she packed up and headed for the coast. All 20 I'm talking about are like this and seem to only be there to fill in each letter of the alphabet. I can't help but admit that it's cute, and if they were to do some sort of mini-series where 2B eats a fish, I would probably watch it. But there's not any reason to include this as part of the main show unless you want to argue that 9S leaving to obtain more research is thematically relevant because it demonstrates the uncontrollable lust that people have for truth and knowledge, and I'm not going to go any longer than that, but be my guest if you'd like to continue. This leaves 6 endings, one of them ending Y, an optional ending that occurs along a side quest. I'm unsure why they gave this an ending since it's the odd one out, but if they put this in the anime I wouldn't be mad as long as it didn't obstruct any of the main story content. It's not unnecessary like the other ones and has a purpose of its own as side content, but overall it's not integral. This leaves the main 5 endings, and just so I don't get completely shit on, it's possible that when people say something like how will they adapt so many endings, they only mean the main 5, but it gives the implication they mean more than that, so I thought I should clear it up. The main 5 endings are obtained in a linear fashion. You cannot get E without C or D, you cannot get C or D without B, and you cannot get B without A. They aren't separate storylines either, which means they could progress from one ending to the other pretty smoothly with the exceptions of C or D, which I'll talk about soon. Endings A and B could be combined pretty easily. They're the same section of story from different perspectives. It's neat and probably would have been less tedious if they actually switched perspectives and made it one ending instead of having to completely redo some of the events for 2 separate yet same paths. I'm trying to think of any reason why they shouldn't, and the only one that came to mind is because it isn't how the game does it, but if that's the only argument, then who cares? At most it would get rid of one of the end titles, which shouldn't warrant much outrage, but NieR seems to be infamous for those, so it might be a bigger deal to some people than I would think. Moving past that, there are endings C and D, which will be the hardest one to adapt, not necessarily because it'll be hard, but mostly because I don't see a scenario that won't upset the fans. The best solution I could think of is a rewind button. Not literally, but imagine this. After getting one of the endings, you go back to the chapter select, and instead of it starting at the point you selected, it takes you back to the end of the scene you just did and rewinds it back to the starting point of the chapter. This would work in either format, so the anime would be able to choose one of the endings, go through the credits, song ends, and the rewind starts to place the characters at the opposite ending. The only issue with this is that the latter ending they choose might come off as canon compared to the former, because even if my rewind idea were used in the game itself, you would be able to rewind and fast forward to any part at any point to get to the outcome you desire after seeing them both. You can also choose not to choose, which is better if you believe either of them work and neither route is forced onto the player experiencing the story. The only way they might be able to pull it off is if they release both endings as 2 separate episodes at the same time, but that's reaching into dream territory. There are other options to adapt it, like altering the fight to some anime only ending or just adapt one of the endings, but people will 100% be upset at either, and I can mostly understand why, so I tried my best to think of possible options. If Yoko Taro helps with the direction of it though, I'm sure they'll brainstorm something better. That leaves ending E, which comes right after to end the whole thing. I don't think anyone would complain if they finished the whole series with this. If they did, then complain to Yoko Taro or something. The second main issue is something I'm going to simplify down for reasons I'll get to later. The game is too long for an anime and there's too much lore to explore to give the complete context of the game. There's no telling how many seasons or episodes total they'll have since it was never announced, but let's say it gets 2. That's more than enough to tell the main story and even a bit more. Looking it up on YouTube, a compilation of all the cutscenes and all the important boss fights are included into a 5-hour video. They also combine both of 2B's and 9S's perspectives, which supports my idea that they should try and mix them somehow, but that's not the point. The point is, if we take an anime episode to be about 22 minutes long, then it could all be completed in about 14 episodes. Obviously this still has some problems, but nothing that wouldn't be able to be fixed in an extra 10 to 11 episodes worth of time. There is some text on screen that could be longer or shorter depending on how they choose to realize it, if they choose to realize it at all. The biggest problem, however, is this. Transitioning from one area straight into the boss fight is really awkward, and there are many moments like this within it. Animating the journey from point A to point B would be worse though, because that would take an episode or more to fully get through, and it would be an episode of nothing. So they need to balance enough time between big events with hopefully some neat animation so that people who have played the game don't feel like they rushed it and people who haven't don't feel like it's dragging. It's a hard dilemma, but this is the only aspect where I can see them having a hard time adapting the material compared to anything else save for the production issues, crunch, or anything external of the main source material. This all hinges on the fact that it'll have 2 seasons though, and if they had any more, it could add more from the game and maybe even some anime original content, or if they had only 1 season, then they'd probably have to bolt through the main story or cut it off around ending AB. I only used 2 seasons because that seems the most reasonable to get through the full story. On a final note, I said I had to simplify the argument for some reasons. That being, it would have been inarguable because the original argument was too ambiguous for me to answer. Some people mentioned the fact that the game is able to immerse you with all its lore and world building, that it creates a completely different experience which an anime cannot hope to replicate, to which I say, what the fuck is immersion? Is it being able to play a game endlessly and hours go by like moments? Is it where you feel as if you are truly the main character, you truly are to be? Is it the fact that is it the fact that every part of the world is so detailed and believable that it flows together to create something believable? Immersion is such an ill-defined term in the context of video games that I'm unsure whether or not anyone could define it properly. If I assume it's the last one, which is still a pretty vague definition, then maybe they're right, but I don't know. I don't even know if I've ever felt immersion like that, and even if I did, how the hell would I know? Would I just know? It's unclear. What I do know is that there were some interesting key moments that I missed in my playthrough. I didn't even see a meal, for fuck's sake, save the cutscene season, and there would 100% be enough time to expand upon what I missed because I never felt compelled enough to get through the gameplay to dive into it. I don't need to see all of it. I doubt that's even the intention, because if it was, then why start here? Why not start at the original NieR or Dragon? But assuming they don't drag out the fights or exploration, then seeing it in 22-minute chunks would be more engaging than having to sit through 20 minutes of less than great gameplay to get maybe 2 minutes of possibly interesting lore. Almost all game adaptations are shit. They're terrible. In fact, the only good ones that I've seen are Castlevania and Arcane, and they're not even direct adaptations. Arcane seems to be a story that was built from the lore, and Castlevania is loosely based on the game. Automata will most likely, if statistics are anything to go by, suffer from the same fate, but I don't want it to be blamed on the fact that there was never a chance. I wish many more game adaptations were taken with a serious approach instead of some low-effort piece that only the fans will watch and only watch because they like the game. The reason I'm so adamant about NieR is because not only is it the most recent one that's fairly big, but it's also one that I think will be taken with more care than others, especially if Yoko Taro has anything to do with it. My biggest hope is that one day I can say to my mom, hey, there's a game I played that was pretty good, and if it got an anime that was also pretty good, wanna check it out? Because she doesn't play video games, but she watches anime, and I think she would like this story. There are many aspects that they will need to try and recreate in the anime to make it even a remotely similar experience. The atmosphere, the feel of the world being destroyed, the exploration of a nearly dead but weirdly alive wasteland, the music. If they don't get the same composer for the game in the anime, it won't be nearly the same. There are also little bits of the story that could be improved, like the on-the-nose dialogue, or maybe 2B could be a bit more clothed during the supposedly emotional moment. I'm just throwing out ideas. There are some drawbacks to remaining in the gameplay, like no end credit fight or something else. Overall though, it has the potential to reach just as great heights that the game did if the effort is put in. So I still stand by my original edited tweet, and if I were to give a more general one that could apply to everybody, it would be, this might be going out on a limb, but I think the NieR Automata anime, if done well, will be just as good as the game, assuming it's adapting the game and not creating a separate storyline. That's a fair statement. Let's hope it holds up. I was reading the Polygon article about the announcement after I made most of the script, and they listed some of the works that Aniplex did, and I went, oh no!